Okay, so I think we are officially live. So we are going to call our social innovation, our December meeting for Social Innovation Commission to order. So I will ask Thalia if she can help us today with calling attendance.
testify, who's the executive director of the Community Investment Trust in Portland, Oregon. He was also specifically associated with the Mercy Corps. And he proposed that the county catalyze a network of community investment trusts to build family wealth within the county's disinvested communities. I'm going to skip over February for a moment and move to March, where there was testimony on a related topic. And in March, we heard from two witnesses, Ayana Kacharis, who's the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Chicago Community Trust, and Janae Defel, who leads the Trust Community Desk. And they, in turn, proposed ways in which the county might facilitate community ownerships more broadly to build family wealth. And so again, the Mr. Haynes recommendations limited to trusts, and the trust recommendations limited, ironically, to initiatives that were including trusts, but other strategies as well, led us to create a working group around community investment vehicles. And we had two commissioners step up and take on the responsibility of leading the working group around community investment vehicles. And that is Commissioner Freeman and Commissioner Raymer. I don't believe either of them is present physically. Madam Chair, either of them with us virtually?
They have not joined as of yet.
Okay, not yet. So let me just throw this effort out so that anyone who is with us, either in person or virtually, who would like to associate himself or herself to that work, all of these things are all hands on deck. And, my hope had been that in this session today, the leaders of a working group might invite specific contributions in areas where they might need help, or where they're stuck, or where they see opportunity, but not what the path might look like. So if you see yourself as one who might want to contribute to the community investment vehicle working group, either declare that now, or if you would kindly reach out to me sometime between now and our next meeting in January, or reach out to Commissioner Freeman or Commissioner Raymer. I'm sure they would welcome your help and your support, because this, I think, is clearly an area where I know Commissioner Freeman in specific has been doing a lot of work, and I've participated in some meetings with her, as others here present today have. And I think we're pretty close to a point where we could start drafting an ordinance around this and secure the county board's support for this kind of an effort. So I think this particular area is one that's very close to being ripe, where we could see a very specific outcome early in the new year. So again, if you're looking for immediate gratification, this may very well be the effort that you want to attach yourself to. So I will leave that there, recognizing that you are all urged to join, if not this working group, other working groups with which you're not currently associated, to the extent you're interested and feel you have something to offer. So I've talked about January and March. I'm not going to move back to February. And in February, we had Michael Stratmanis, who is Executive Vice President for Civic Engagement at the Obama Foundation. And he had proposed, he gave us a really interesting background about the way in which they're ensuring that their talent pipeline is diverse, particularly with respect to building trades in their case. But the Obama Foundation specifically offered up that they would like to collaborate with us in developing a model businesses generally within the county might follow to ensure that they diversify their available jobs, not only in construction, but more broadly. This too is very exciting, it seems to me. One, because of its direct impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is what we're all about. But also the opportunity to collaborate with the Obama Foundation would be, I think, something that all of us would relish and find very personally satisfying, as well as institutionally important, given our mandate and our mission here. So the Diverse Talent Pipeline Working Group is chaired by Commissioner Aglepe, and I don't believe she's here either, personally or an apparition of her. So again, I leave the same offer on the table. Any of you would like to get involved in working with Commissioner Aglepi and others here, but also with the Obama Foundation. And they have really developed a very effective means of ensuring that those people who might have barriers to employment or those who, for whatever reason, are not really optimized in their career paths now can be put to work profitably where they're put on a positive career path. So I mentioned that as another area. I think that should be exciting to all of us. And if you're interested, again, reach out to me or Commissioner Aglepi sometime between now and when we meet again in January. We'll put you to work because these things are unfolding and we do want to make sure this turns into action by the county board to the maximum extent practicable. And it's our job to make that happen. Then in April, we had a very interesting presentation in an area that I think is new to many of us. And that is, we had Marc Elston, who's a Master of Divinity and an expert in church property developments. And he was looking at how the county might help facilitate the repurposing of underutilized church property for the public good. Now, since then, we actually have a very prominent example of that here in the county, where Dr. Brazier and his mega church are taking the church's parking lots and building it into, with the adjacent properties, what will be known as Woodlawn Central, which is going to be a very significant planned unit development, residential, commercial, entertainment district, wedged between the Obama Center, the University of Chicago, and not too far from the lake. So it will in fact be a tourist attraction among all other things. But the catalyst was the church recognizing that it had parking facilities that were beyond its need, and how might they put that to work for the public good. And I've had some involvement in that effort, and it's a very exciting one. I encourage you to take a look at their website. It's Woodlawn Central. So we had Mr. Elston come in and talk about how this might be applied more broadly. We've had some conversations with leadership of some of the mayors and city managers in the Southland around this. And we did create a working group for which we creatively named the Underutilized Church Property Working Group. You can tell I'm an author, right? Then Commissioner Yonan raised his hand and volunteered to chair that group. And regrettably, Commissioner Yonan is no longer a commissioner because of changes in his employment situation. So we're actually looking for somebody to step up and lead that group. So if there's anyone here physically or virtually who would like to take that on, I think it's a very interesting opportunity. And then there's much more of this underutilized church property. I think we may have to backtrack on something here since I see somebody walking in the room who may have something to say to us. But if there's someone here who would like to volunteer to lead that effort, that would be very welcome. Absent the leader, that working group no longer continues. So it's an existential threat to the underutilized church property working group for failure of leadership. And I'd be the last person in this room or beyond to be criticized for lack of leadership. So I know none of you would like to be labeled in that way either. So if you are interested in taking that on or learning more about what that might mean, reach out to me and I'll be happy to have a private conversation with you one-on-one on that. So Commissioner Freeman, I believe has walked in. Am I right?
You are right.
And we're delighted to have you with us. And I was just singing your praises about the work that you have been doing with great accomplishments in the community investment vehicle world. And I was going to invite you, if you'd be so kind, as to let us know in a more granular fashion than perhaps your earlier reports would have allowed, about where you're at in your process, what help you might need to move this along, what you think the future holds for this effort. Because as I indicated before you arrived, and this is really a testament to your leadership, I suggested that this may very well be the first piece of legislation that comes out of this year's work of the commission. So I'm hopeful that will be the case. So maybe you can, if I might defer to you with the chair's permission and allow you to kind of bring us up to speed in as granular fashion as you're comfortable. If you push a button there, everyone will hear you.
That might, yeah. You might have to, do you want to, if you want to steal one of their mics in the back?
There's technological challenges.
No. Okay. Yeah, we'll have to borrow a mic.
Thank you very much.
Kristen, thank you. We hear you loud and clear now, so thank you.
Okay, so for the community investment vehicle work, the group actually started out as a community investment trust. On the basis of one of the presentations that we had, identifying the community investment trust that Mercy Housing in Portland had created up. Since we have worked in the group, the city has released an actual RFP for community wealth building ecosystems. Michael has been a part of that working group. Wendy from BMO, representatives from United Way, CCLF. So we've had a number of engagements as well as trying to coordinate and correspond with both the community help desk that is being housed in. Thank you so much.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Absolutely, but we get it done either way, right? So the community help desk, which is incubated inside of the Chicago Community Trust, as well as trying to coordinate with CCT and a group of other funders. So since this work has started, there has been an additional working group outside of the county that has been meeting at the city. And then there has been essentially a cohort of us that were called together around the Reclaiming Vacant Conference or Reclaiming Vacant Spaces Conference. So the community help desk had a convening of nonprofits as well as economic development practitioners to continue to further this conversation. So at this point, the city has released $2 million in funding. They have allocated $15 million for building of the community wealth building ecosystem, but that money is not to actually invest in projects just yet, it's to build the infrastructure for the community investment vehicles. On a more personal side, we being a part of, I'm a part of a development team that is a finalist for the Chicago Prize. We have incorporated a community investment vehicle component into our particular development, which is a $5 million development. And are trying to work with the county, particularly because one of the things that we realized is an issue is that based upon how the Cook County Land Bank works, community members cannot invest into that unless they are on the front end of the deal, meaning they would still have to go through the levels of due diligence. And until that happens, otherwise there is a 12-month post-construction waiting period before this vehicle could be opened up to participants in the neighborhood if we are pursuing a Cook County Land Bank Authority project. So I think there's been some really good work, especially as we move forward to identify feasibility, partners, interests, community areas. And so I am more than excited to move this along, particularly around trying to allocate funding so that this does not just continue to be a conversation in a conceptual space, but that we can really try to get nuts to bolts and moving some things forward.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you, I know we had once upon a time, we're looking forward to meeting with Commissioner Anaya with a view toward crafting an ordinance around this space. So I would suggest that early in the new year, potentially even this month, we get together and kind of determine the art of the possible and start some drafting along those lines and make this a reality because by having our first ordinance, we will thereby empower the second and third ordinances to come forward. So thank you, Commissioner Freeman. Appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to skip over May, which is where we were in the calendar, because you will see that connects to another speaker and talk about the presentation we all heard in June. At that time, Reggie Greenwood, a former member of this commission and now the director of the Chicago Southland Economic Development Corporation, offered an actionable social policy recommendation which would empower Cook County to become what he described as the Silicon Valley of electric vehicle industry. And Commissioner Killen volunteered to lead that effort. I do not believe she is present either. So the same offer is extended to all of you. Should you be interested in electric vehicles, and who among us is not? Please reach out to her or to me, and we'll ensure that that working group gains the benefit of your insights and intelligence and knowledge. So thank you for that. Then in July, and I'll bring these two together, July and August, we had two related presentations, conceptually related presentations. First in July, we had Jens Ludwig, who is the director of the University of Chicago's Crime Lab, and he offered his policy recommendations based on behavioral science to cost effectively reduce the county's acceptably high rates of gun violence. I don't know what an acceptable level of gun violence might have been, as well as reduce the county's rates of incarceration. And then following up on Jens's presentation, we had Professor Ashanu Chaklapadhyay, I'm close to being correct on that, at the University of Chicago Medicine, who proposed how the county's policymakers of various kinds, and he was thinking of sheriff, the courts, police, others, can leverage artificial intelligence to better understand patterns of crime, and thereby improve the quality of their decisions for the public good. And Commissioner Alston very generously volunteered to lead the effort that would deal with crime and incarceration and recidivism. And again, both Jens Ludwig and the good professor agreed to collaborate with the working group and with the commission. So I see that Commissioner Alston is here with us, and thanks for being with us. Do you have, can you give us an update on your efforts to this point, Harry?
Yes, and I'm going to make this a tag team.
Yeah, but, and I know you're working with Commissioner DeBow as well, but if you could turn your mic on, that would be helpful, not only for us, but for those who are tuning in virtually. Or we'll hand you a,
There
oh,
you go.
that's good, thank you, appreciate it.
So thanks everyone for your support. I'm asking for that in advance. Looking forward to it. A couple of things. Since those two presentations, we've had a chance not only to talk to Dr. Ludwig and Dr. Chaklapadhyay, but I've also reached out to a few other experts in related fields. These include Dr. Robert Vargas, Dean of Social Sciences and Director of University of Chicago's Chicago Justice Project, Dr. Desmond Patton, Ryan and Randy Schwartz University Professor at the University of Pennsylvania, who has done a lot of exploratory work, particularly in Chicago, around the interface between social media and gang violence and young adults. Also, along with meeting with Dr. Ludwig, he included Jeff Sievert from the University of Chicago Center for Risk, Radical Innovation for Social Change. So we've had a chance to have some pretty exciting conversations along the way. And this is kind of pointing at beginning to build a framework that we hope to launch in January. Some of the critical factors for that are to look at both short and long-term solutions around factors that help create and sustain violence in community, to consider strongly community assets and community systems to generate better outcomes broadly speaking, not just limiting that to gun violence. And we're also looking to see what others have learned that can then begin to point us at the types of levers available through the county to kind of put into action some of the things we hear through our discussions. We've also are trying to set a context that's value-based, and we've proposed the following values for practice of our working group. These include develop recommendations that are both actionable and interdisciplinary, and I say that as a critical component to look at flexible approaches to tackling problems, because we know that this is a large intersecting problem with many, many different dimensions. We want to embrace the cultural context of communities and build cross-cultural competency. And I say that in a lot of different ways, not just simply around race and ethnicity and gender, but there are other aspects of cross-cultural competency that we think can be explored. We want to prioritize equity, community voice, and community asset building. And we want to see data as a problem solver, not a solution. So, we certainly appreciate any response to these values that we're laying out as kind of our foundation. And with that regard, we've come up with a few questions that have bubbled in our many, many conversations. And we want to share them with the body here and kind of percolate them up for
Yeah,
some.
that's what we're here for,
for
please.
some
Thank you.
feedback. So the first one would be if we ground our working group as an interdisciplinary effort, who do you feel we need to have at the table? And who can you enlist to play a part? That's the first question we would ask you all to think about. As an interdisciplinary effort, who needs to be?
Harry, maybe just in the interest of completeness, if you could identify your other areas of inquiry,
Sure.
because the answers may overlap, so we can then have a more comprehensive understanding of what you're seeking input about.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we were planning to do. I just kind
Thank
of
you.
paused to catch my breath.
You're permitted to catch your breath. We appreciate it. Thank you.
So, the other, that community violence intervention is attracting a lot of attention and a lot of funding. So what do we think the county can do to impact violence reduction? And what are the levers that it can pull beyond investing in community violence intervention and policing? Another is, how might you imagine ways to tackle this complex problem without grounding it as a criminogenic approach? What if we approach it from a lens of community well-being? And I know the Nonviolence Institute kind of thinks about this in terms of the beloved community as put forth by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So
Yeah.
you want to share some of our other things, if you will?
I think one of the key questions on our mind that the commission can help us kind of grapple with and brainstorm here is, other large cities, notably New York, LA, Dallas, have been much more successful in reducing gun violence than Chicago has to date. And so, can we, in our working group, think through some of the blockages on this and what the commission can do to release those blockages? There's likely going to be a funding cliff coming at all levels of government, actually, likely on the CVI funding, and that's very concerning. It's very concerning in the world that I'm in, with the Institute for Nonviolent Chicago, but it's concerning for us all. And so, we thought the county can probably do a lot of things on this front, but with that regards to funding, what can the commission think through in terms of how the county has already stepped up, actually in funding street outreach and other CVI interventions, but what more, what else, what different? Should we stop there maybe? Just take those questions. We've got a whole other round too, but I don't know how much time we have.
Well, why don't we invite the commissioners to offer their input? I should mention that We've had two commissioners join us virtually. That's Commissioner Males. And who was the other one?
Kathleen Caliento.
Yeah, Commissioner Caliento is also participating virtually.
Maybe I'll say one more thing too, before we launch into that. I mean, we've been, Harry and I have been talking about, if you think of this in a framework, there's a lot of pieces to this. So we've been trying to noodle some frameworks and, one of the ways of looking at the ecosystem of violence and violent election is you've got kind of some specific zones of actors. You've got police, you've got community players that are leading community violence disruption work, and you've got government. You've got several levels of government: city government, county government, state government, and that is an ecosystem of players that actually need to coordinate, need to be consistent in how they're working on strategies to do this. I think that's a lot of players. There's a lot of issues embedded in the questions we just asked. And so I think one of the things that we're looking for as you respond to these questions is, what do the commissioners think are some particular focus areas that we should focus on? We can't blow the ocean. So what's the through line on this, right? There's a lot of zones, there's data, there's systems, funding. So the question really is, what can we do as a county commission that would be most impactful in reducing violence with all these things we put on the table?
Can I modify that question slightly? I think it's a really good question. But I would also suggest that we think about building blocks here. So not only what's going to be, immediately or most impactful, but also what serves as a foundation for other steps that may follow it. So we can look at this as kind of a sequential series of steps. And where might, maybe there's no low hanging fruit, but if there is low hanging fruit, what might that be a starting point? And I think it's correct when you are identifying various stakeholders. And if we look at from the perspective of the self-interest of each stakeholder, how best to align their interests with those of the public such that they have reason to step forward with whatever resources necessary to make this real, whether it's money or manpower or intelligence or data or whatever the heck it is. If we kind of look at this as a multi-stakeholder initiative and identifying what are the value propositions for each of the necessary desirable stakeholders to step up, so that not everybody says, this isn't can't be solved because everybody's tried, nobody's done it. So step back and let somebody either futilely try again, or just assume this is the way it's going to be. Because I think there are players now. It's interesting, our speakers, and Harry, you alluded to other speakers or other people you've consulted at the University of Chicago. So I would think the university as a stakeholder is a player that we might engage about looking at conditions around the university, because the university, and I know there's been some change, there's change in administration there and so on, but historically, the university's been seen as an oasis. And they have not been good neighbors, I'll say. But they've tried hard recently, and there have been steps taken in a much more positive direction. But they have significant resources, and they have a vested interest in having a safe community for their students, for their faculty, for their staff, and their institutional objectives and their mission. So I think I'll just throw that out as one possibility to engage them, not only in terms of those people who are on their faculty or running their various centers, who have an intellectual commitment to this problem, but actually the administration of the university, to see how we might work collaboratively with them and develop, for example, an ordinance that would carve out that specific area and use that as a laboratory to test different models and approaches and strategies and see to what extent they actually improve the outcome. So I just throw that, I didn't mean to preempt, but it just occurred to me that was your observation prompted me to make that suggestion as one possible way to start.
And in line with that, I think what you're alluding to is the of who are the anchor institutions in some of these communities. And so certainly you look at those that have a large physical presence and footprint, but I think there are also anchor institutions in a sense in terms of their community personality, their community engagement, and their connectedness to physical space. So as we think about anchor institutions, we might expand our definition about how we interpret that.
I think that's exactly right. So I mean, it's often thought of as meds and eds. Right, it's the universities and the hospitals are the anchors, but I would also say the churches, for example, which we've raised in another context, and there are other institutions of various sorts that have the ear and attention of residents. So I'll step back and allow others to comment.
Commentary. One, definitely on the anchor institution piece, because a lot of the work from just a neighborhood-based perspective is the businesses are anchored. Those within commercial corridors are anchors. Grocery stores are anchors. And so when you start to look at certain hotspots of crime activity, for me, I'm doing a lot of work in Garfield Park. So my central point is where I live, where I'm currently working, and a lot of this. So we have INBC in the neighborhood. And one thing Tenny is very adamant about is he is very aware that where they go, gentrification follows. So the other piece of this is not just stopping violence for who may come to the neighborhood, but incorporating those who have been living during these violent episodes. And so for what I hear a lot of is like, well, how are these business owners included? How are the property owners, especially the ones that are not long distance property owners, like the ones that are present in the neighborhoods, who many may be occupying the buildings that they own. And so if you talk about particular strategies, some of it definitely needs to be in alignment with how the city and the county is making investments in real estate. Because these neighborhoods are often, so if you're looking at Invest Southwest, or if you're looking at the purpose of the Cook County Land Bank, it's often concentrated on the south and the west sides of the city, outside and then into the suburbs. But there are also overlays of violence within certain portions of the corridor. And while yes, University of Chicago is one anchor institution, they're not coming to the west side. And so you also have to be considerate of place-based violence, because the rationale as to why some of these things are happening, what the police response is, how the community is engaging and who they're engaging with and why they're engaging, is extremely important. And so I do think the approach definitely from an asset-based place and understanding how neighborhood assets tie into this, as well as who these neighborhood anchors are outside of the large meds and eds. Corner store folks know what's going on. The candy lady may know what's going on. So I know it's hard to get that granular, but these are still the same people. If you have the ambassadors on the street or you have the street outreach workers, they know who some of these neighborhood-based anchors are, both as individuals as well as institutions. And it's very important to also make this process inclusive. And I know when we talk inclusion, I almost feel like it's overused, but when I say that, it's like, how are we getting information socially? So I appreciate, because I got 2 kids who are always, that's all they do on TikTok, or you hear about something happen on Facebook and it gets carried over in a lot of ways. The music, YouTube, so you can start to track certain activity, but it's like, how is this even being aggregated in a way that is not used then to exploit? So that is always my concern when we start to talk about these efforts, especially like the criminality and the social behavior. Like, how do we make sure that we are putting these safeguards in place? So again, that if I have lived in a neighborhood and I have been the one that's undergoing the violence, when the community starts to turn, I still have an opportunity to participate and not be upside.
Commissioner Brutus, I think, had a comment as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Vice Chair, Madam Chair. would just like to add a little bit to that. When we talk about anchor institutions, I think we also need to think about thinking outside the box, right? And inviting, either more or different violence interrupter organizations into certain neighborhoods and making them and incorporating them as part of the new anchor institutions in those neighborhoods, right? Because not every single neighborhood has an anchor institution that is willing to step up and be, a partner in this prevention work, right? And also I want to just add that, we've got to think about how to fund some of these groups, right? Who are part of the foundation of these neighborhoods where violence is occurring at, higher rates or what have you, but that's another thing we need to really think about, right? Is subsidizing or even incentivizing it to be part of the solution, right? Because in the neighborhood that I live in, the number one tracking kind of violent incident is carjackings and burglaries, right? It's not so much the shooting, right? So like, how do we, build ambassadors? How do we, beyond just, get the complaint that someone got robbed, parking their car in the garage in the back of an alley? How do we, build that neighborhood network, right? How do we incentivize that to occur so that it does become part of the safety plan of a community, right? How do we make that sustainable? I love the idea that there are a lot of new ideas, right? But I think that, it also would behoove us to think outside the box beyond, the eds and the meds and the meds and the eds and, the usual suspects, because the usual suspects, they're there, they're not going anywhere. And, for them, this is an industry in which they are not only an expertise, but they're there, right? So, how do we get a creation of new ideas to solve old problems, right? Because, we're getting, I think we're seeing new levels of crime, right? It's getting more and more unbelievable, right? The amount of sophistication in some of these crimes are beyond the abilities of, Crime Stoppers, police, right? In this case, the county sheriff, right? And how do we, and then furthermore, like, the county law enforcement, right? Because we're here at the county primarily, even though most of us might live in the city, but the county sheriff is a law enforcement, agency for the county, and they're stressed. They're stressed. They're all over the place, and they're asked to do an unbelievable amount of work in terms of policing, villages and, townships. And, I think of the work that they're having to do to police Chicago Heights and places like that, where they don't have their own police force, or they don't have enough of a budget to have a real, police force. Our county officers are stressed. It's more work for the sheriff. That invariably becomes more work for the entire system, so, the state's attorney and these deals. So it's just, I just like the idea that we should be thinking outside the box and coming up with new ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other comments from any of the commissioners? Yeah.
You started the conversation kind of talking about the complexity of the ecosystem and really figuring out where to focus. And it's an almost impossible question. But and talking about this, and there was a talk about the stakeholder mapping. And I think starting there and really understanding what's been tried where and who's been involved, and kind of mapping that out and seeing where leverage could actually be had, over and above what's the normal system would be a place to start. Because otherwise it's kind of like swirling around in a whole bunch of where do you even start, and like when you push something, then it kind of like goes away. But I would recommend that the working group just try starting to map out some of the actors, because it may seem fragmented when you first look at it, but there's probably more relationship in the system than we realize.
I think it's a really good point. And it's not only the value proposition between a given stakeholder and the public writ large, it's a value proposition between one stakeholder and another stakeholder. So it's reinforcing positive relationships and breaking down barriers so they have incentives to work with one another as well as pursue the public good, and they also have disincentives not to do that. So I mean, it's really tap into that, you know, behavioral element of it, I think is important, and I think there are ways of codifying that institutionally within the DNA of each of those stakeholders. And I think there are arguments can be made and advanced and put into practice and play. You had some other questions you were holding
Well,
back on.
before I get to another question, I was just gonna kind of wrap my arms around a few things that I heard, and there's the underlying need to understand relationships, interactions, historical types of things, and nobody has said it, but it's certainly there, is data science, right? And the importance of really being able to have quantifiable information about things. And in my conversation with Dr. Ishino, he was really saying that, you know, let's consider how data science can help us figure out where resources should be directed and invested. Let's use it to kind of really look at and understand the relationships. And he said that some different actors in community, or as the way he put it, in the environment that creates the nexus of circumstances that violence occurs. So there's that. The other thing that really struck me is one of the other folks I talked to, Dr. Patton, who's done an extreme amount of work around social media. And he was saying, you know, I really think about social media, that there's such a blurring of the line between our physical world and our virtual world because of social media. He says, I tend to think of social media as another neighborhood. You know, so when you begin to use that as a point of reference, it changes the way you think of things. So I'll just stop.
I would like to just react to one part of that, if I may, and without putting any of our commissioners on the spot, I want to tell you that Commissioner Males, who is participating virtually, and I had a conversation offline about his interest in exploring some topics relating to data. And that's his area of expertise. So without asking him any questions or putting him on the spot, you may wish to reach out to him separately and see if he might be willing to provide some insight on that topic.
So something else out there, or we'll move to our next step.
Can we pause for a second? I do want to ask Chief Flores to talk briefly on that, because a lot of the ARPA funding that is coming through is utilizing data that has been made available. And I think that that's a really good point as we move forward to see what the county has been done, so that we can focus on, are we on the right track? Are we not? And how exactly can we pivot right before getting to the other questions? I think it'd be a good addition to the conversation.
Thank you, and as the discussion goes on, it just brings to mind so many things, because it is a complicated issue with many partners. And many of the initiatives that the county has been really deliberate in thinking about and rolling out over the past 2 years has taken a very data-based approach and research approach, because we know that we can't address everything. But this provides, this additional funding right now provides us an opportunity to pilot things, but also be deliberate in trying to identify what is within the county sphere of influence. What can we positively impact? Because we can't do it all. There are so many players. So as I am listening to these ideas, one thought that came to mind is the county board did approve significant funding for the Justice Advisory Council to provide additional grants, significant number of grants for violence prevention organizations. So even inviting them into this space to have a discussion, to really get their perspective and landscape assessment. Like, what are the gaps? Where can we leverage their learnings so that we can be more productive in assessing what is it that this commission should propose. I think there's many opportunities to really partner with those entities, and oftentimes what I have seen from the economic development side, but even in government, bringing the stakeholders, even the government stakeholders that have space in this would be beneficial. And as this commission, we have the opportunity to help make those linkages happen. So bringing individuals from the Justice Advisory Council, potentially with even individuals from the Sheriff's Office and others that operate in this space, to have a productive discussion about linkages and how to continue to advance the work together. I think that there's an opportunity there, but most immediately there has been quite a bit of funding provided under the Justice Advisory Council, and I think that there's an opportunity to learn from the data that they might be gathering. I know that as part of the ARPA programming, each initiative that gets funded is collecting quite a bit of data so that we can utilize this time frame to assess the impact of each of these programs. So I would love to engage them in this discussion and really learn from what they're seeing, because I know that they've been piloting many things with that funding.
Commissioner Flores, thank you so much. It's an invaluable contribution, and I would suggest, given the complexity of this topic and the fact that we're looking at a multifactorial phenomenon, not only is this well within the domain of the working group, but I would suggest that we have testimony from some of those folks before the commission at large. So if you would kindly share with me who you think might be most useful in that regard, and again, Harry and Wendy, you do the same, and I will, let's get them on the calendar early in the year and get the benefit of their inputs, but let all the commissioners hear it, because we all perceive things through different lenses, and to the extent that we can gain insight from people who are doing the hard work on the ground, and we can then match it against our pre-existing knowledge base, I think that's where we're going to likely get to the best possible collective outcome here. So if you would be so kind as to do that, share with me who you think it ought to be, and you guys do the same, and let's make that happen, because one of the things I hear from you, and it's absolutely correct, this is just so damn complicated. I mean, and there's so many different pieces to this puzzle, and nobody's gotten it right. Some have done better than others. Let's be better than most, and let's let that be the baseline from which we continue to still do better than that. And so if there are people that you can all identify, let me know who they are, and I'll offer an invitation for them to come speak. And we can devote 2 or 3 sessions to this. I think what's more important than the safety of our community and the safety of our kids and the implications for the commercial sector and and livability of the city and the county. I mean, this is the ball game. So, and it's about living healthy and living. So that's what I would ask of the 3 of you who are demonstrating some specific leadership in this field, and I would welcome that. So
I think the idea of having folks come forward and say, we put in an additional several million during COVID into street outreach, which was vital, and hearing how they feel, what could be added to that, how could that be done differently, and what else, and then mixing it. I think part of our working group is we've now got a lot of reach, stakeholders like CBI folks, right? The street outreach groups like Island Chicago, and have them come with the county funders.
Let's figure out what we need.
Let's still what we need.
Let's figure out what we need from a county perspective, but also from the perspective of other actors. So we can reach out to them as well, because we need everybody who's relevant involved in the solution, or it's going to fail, or it'll be only partly successful when it ought not be. So I think that's a terrific suggestion. And now you had some other questions, I think.
There's a hand up here.
Commissioner Cooley.
Roger, Commissioner Cooley, thank you.
Thank you. This is exciting to start thinking about the interconnections across also some of our other working groups or committees. That there's a lot of, keep talking about all the different layers. So there's the kind of surface level of working, of dealing with the immediate violence prevention and trying to lower the incidence, but also starting to think about the longer term structural issues that are assuming are the real cause of the issue of violence. And how this is kind of one lens to look at the development as a city step of affordable housing, food access to public health issues, educational opportunities, environmental justice issues. And, is this one way to start thinking about how to interconnect a lot of our issues we're trying to address?
Well, the point of this commission is that the social impact type issues are all interconnected. You start improving one, all the others get a little better. If you fail to do that, they all get a little worse. So,
Yeah,
we look at
trying to
this
think
whole,
about the mindset of us.
yeah,
doing that.
we want to look at this holistically, and I think obviously this is a very significant entry point. Because without this, we don't have much else. If we don't have public safety, and if we're continuing incarcerating people rather than improving their lives and their hope and their chances for success individually, their families suffer, their communities suffer, all of us suffer. So, yeah, I mean, I think your point is well taken and right on the money. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Roger. The bill?
And just going back to, I know you want to talk to a lot of experts already. It's never enough to talk about. When my organization worked on the waste strategy for the city of Chicago, we talked to those cities where things worked out, and we learned that they tried a lot of stuff that didn't work first. So I would say we should probably add to the list. Let's talk to some of those leaders in other cities and counties to really figure out also what they've tried and didn't work.
So one of the things I just want to say, because it's come up, Gary and I talked about it, so, and this simplifies things too. Like, I don't want us to think that we could get stalled if we say, oh my God, it's so many facets, it's so complicated. I mean, the reality is, we know what New York and LA and Dallas have done. This is part of another project that I'm working on. We know what has worked and what hasn't, and we are working on some projects here to stand up some organizations in the city that put pressure on the whole ecosystem to do it better. And so we can cut to the chase of that research and say, we will in our committee and say, we know what works. We've got some blueprints. And I think there are a lot of actors, but I think we can focus on a few and make headway. We shouldn't say this is so complicated. And I think that comment was very interesting to me in the way we've talked about this, looked at some of our other questions related to what you're saying, where you can't the violence in our neighborhoods is from deep-rooted issues that relate to limited educational opportunities and attainment or health outcomes, lack of access to income and wealth opportunities. And it's a cycle of trauma. And so this is the tip of the spear of a lot of the social issues that we're looking at. And maybe it's interesting to think about it that way, that what we're working on in this committee is the tip of the spear in terms of crisis and urgency and trauma. But it's really related to a lot of things that we're working on as a commission. And maybe this makes something that's more integrated and holistic about what we're doing. We should look at it that way somehow. Maybe we can integrate our work more that way.
I have like after hearing some things, especially going back to the community well-being piece. One of the things we lift up in Garfield Park is Black culture wellness. So looking at the work from the approach to say, a lot of the things that are happening that are negative in the neighborhood are a result of not being well. And so the values, there's a set of values, there's a set of principles, there's a set of elements that are being uplifted. They're personally really tied to Kwanzaa in many cases, so folks have some understanding of what this is. But then the question becomes for a lot of people and what we're talking about doing, one is a behavior change marketing campaign that has been recently adopted by the city that they are going to push forward as well. So it's how are we addressing messaging? What are the values and how do they look? So not just saying put down the gun, but it's like, what's the value that, because right now there isn't necessarily a value for life. So how are we identifying the value system? How are we working to optimize or modify from a perspective of roots that folks can go back to culturally that have some resonating value to them? And I created a rubric to actually measure that. So within the work that we're doing within Garfield Park, there's a discussion of this rubric. Yeah, so the Garfield Park Right to Wellness Collaborative. And it's like, what do these principles look like in action? So for each organization that's at the table, it's like, it may not be the same for Garfield Park Coordinating Council versus INDC versus me who's doing real estate development, but at the end of the day, all of the players who are doing the work in their way contribute to the same overall goal, but it's driving back to how do we live these values? So I think that element of lifting up this cultural well-being kind of crosses across, it covers all these bases. So it's not just good food, it's not just a good job, it is overall well-being. What does it take for a community and a neighborhood to be well? And I think that lens will help kind of narrow down what we feel may be a really big problem. The other piece I want to highlight is like progress happens at the speed of trust. So I want to be very cautious when you say, okay, well, let's look at these other neighborhoods and see what's worked. I say this as an economic development practitioner. A lot of this work we do is lightning in a bottle because there are certain elements, components, figures that on one surface look to be identical, but when you get down to the minutia, they're very, very nuanced. So yes, we can take examples from some places, but tweaking as appropriate and understanding some of the dynamics of like the street outreach workers versus like higher up, their perception is going to be different, their responses are going to be different. And what they're seeing as being the challenge, I think it's going to be really interesting to hear and have folks in the room. So I'm really excited to see the players.
Very
come
useful,
together.
very useful comments. Thank you very much. And I think you two have other questions, am I right? Or have those been addressed?
I think we'll just, we wanted to give the group a sense of what our next steps would be. So the first thing I want to say is we invite.
Could I just ask you to summarize for us to the extent you know, what are your next steps?
Yeah. So the first is we're going to gather our committee in January. And hopefully there'll be a few more of you around our table if you're interested. At a minimum, I would say, let us know if you're interested to participate in some way or contribute. We've got great suggestions and ideas here. Then what we're going to do is take all of this. I think we've got this for. And we're going to create a straw model as a committee that would hone in on where we do think we should focus in a couple of areas that where we think the county can make the most impact. Clearly funding is a component, but where else? What is it? Ordinance? Is it policy? What actions? And so we're going to kind of use that lens and talk about the different zones that we referred to today. Data analytics, systems change, some of the prevention work, and go through this and say, right, what are a couple of things that pop up where we think we're going to get the most impact? And then we will do that investigation, and our goal would be to come back basically to the commission that by the spring, we would have at least 3 very specific recommendations of action. So the work between now and spring, and we would come back to the commission.
Yeah, I would ask, I would love to get involved in this work more actively, and if you would keep me posted, and I'd love to attend your working group meetings, and I think there's already been evidence here that others will as well. So thank you for your leadership in this. It's tricky, it's complicated, but it's oh so important, and I think we all agree with that. So thanks for everything you've done so far and everything you will be doing.
You're welcome. And certainly one of the things we'll do is we'll kind of consolidate what we've heard, build it into this document that we've got, make it available
Thank you.
to everybody, so you all will find our other questions, and you're welcome to dive on in there and begin to respond, join in the working group. But I've seen in conversations that there are a lot of places people have an appetite to join in, and some have an urgency to see outcomes tomorrow. Others are more interested in more systemic, longer term change initiatives. So I really see this working group having a kind of adaptive approach where people will gravitate toward where their most energy is, but we'll also collect on the synergy of the people in the room and keep bubbling up priorities and ideas and looking for the connective tissue between those different ideas, and that we think will take us through 2 or 3 or 4 recommendation areas.
Very much appreciate that observation. Thank you.
And I certainly have a couple people, as I've listened to folks today, based on who I've talked to, I'm ready to say, look, get them on the agenda right away to come in and.
Let me know, and we'll make that happen. Thank you.
And really quick before we shift, I just want to offer also my office as a space and a tool, because I think it's important. We talked about those blueprints, right? But there's so many out there. And I think the most important part for us to get a good piece out of the commission that would be valuable is to really understand the local context and also jurisdiction in the county. So identifying the assets that we have, for example, we haven't talked about Cook County Health and how the health system can play a role in the issue. And in return, there's a lot of different assets here in Cook County that, you know, bringing that lens also would be really beneficial to being able to condense some of the priorities, but also understand the jurisdictional power that Cook County would have that would be actually meaningful and powerful in its way. And it speaks volumes to what also Vice Chair Layton mentioned about, you know, the different partners and the different levels potentially of government and how we play a role and working together is going to be extremely important. So thank you for all the work that you've
And
done.
what the chair has not yet mentioned is that she's going to be in the leadership of Health and Hospitals Committee. So that'll give us another access point. So yes. So yeah, so thank you. And now let's move on to our year-end review. And I'm a little out of sequence for a reason here. In May, we had Daniel Biss, who's the mayor of Evanston, the first city in the nation to have enacted reparations legislation, and Robin Rue Simmons, the executive director of First Repair, formerly an alderperson of Evanston, offered their recommendations about how the county might approach the topic of reparations. And then fast forward to November, Professor Stephen Durloff, who's the director of the Stone Center for Research on Wealth Inequality and Mobility at the University of Chicago's Harris School, also proposed reparations policies for Cook County. Now, interestingly, Professor Durloff's presentation could have been construed in lots of different ways, other than relating specifically to reparations. But he suggested that, no, that's how I want to position this. Because, you know, as you look at kind of his wheelhouse, he's running the U of C center relating to wealth inequality and mobility, which obviously ties to what we've just been talking about, as well as other things we've talked about and will be talking about. But he sees this as kind of a reparations play. I did participate in some conversations about reparations with Robin Rue Simmons and the folks in California, who are ahead of us with reparations, although took a very different tack. This is obviously a very interesting topic, an important topic, a provocative topic, controversial topic. But Commissioner Anderson, who chairs the Evanston Community Foundation, chairs the Reparations Working Group. So if any of you are interested in joining that group, I think it presents some very specific challenges from a definitional point of view, looking at, even if you buy into the notion that there ought to be reparations, then who's to be covered, and what lineage must they have had in order to be within the class of beneficiaries, and among other definitional issues of that sort. And Evanston, of course, has approached it from the point of view of housing, but there are lots of other ways in which reparations can be delivered. So that too is an area where I think, it's intellectually it's interesting, but from a social impact point of view, it may be transformational if done right. So I raise that with you, and again, I offer the same deal with anyone who wants to get involved on reparations. Reach out to Commissioner Anderson or me, and we'll get you involved in that. And again, Mayor Biss has expressed his enthusiasm in working with the commission in giving us the benefit of the Evanston experience. Robin Rue Simmons runs a nonprofit organization that counsels government agencies about this very topic. And of course, Professor Dunlef has expressed an interest in continuing to work with the commission on this and other topics. So we have lots of expertise already in the mix, others always available to us. And if you're interested, let Sol Anderson know or me, and we'll see that you're put to work. Then in September, we had Amaya Pawar, former Chicago alderman and senior advisor to First Midwest Group, as well as Paul Williams, the founder executive director of the Center for Public Enterprise, made the observation and kind of built upon the observation that the county already owns and operates one of the largest healthcare systems in the country. Why can't it bring the same success to models to own and operate grocery stores, pharmacies, banks, housing, energy? And obviously there's a lot of action and a lot of news about lots of those things. But what this led to the creation of an industrial policy working group. And of course, the county has no industrial policy. So were this to be pursued and to be driven by social equity considerations, which I think is the key, we would be the leaders of that very effort. And it's a clear space. And Commissioner Thomas is chairing the working group. She is working with Commissioner Cooley and Commissioner Morgan. And I've sat in at some of their meetings. I understand there is a call scheduled for tomorrow, in which I'll be participating. I hope others will as well. So again, if you're interested in kind of looking at the bigger market-based opportunity to drive social change by having government step into commercial vacuums to create jobs, to create value propositions for consumers. It's a whole interesting kind of social enterprise way of thinking about these things. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, if you could reach out to Commissioner Thomas or myself. And again, she does have a meeting, a Zoom call scheduled for tomorrow. If you're interested in participating, let her know or let me know, and I'll see that you get the link to the Zoom call. And then the final presentation for the year, although I did take them out of sequence, was in October. We had Scott McFarland, who once upon a time ran the Serve Illinois Commission, in which I was privileged to serve, but now is the Director for National Service for Lead for America. And he presented a proposal, among other things, for a background check passport system to facilitate volunteerism in Cook County. and volunteerism relating to the social sector, nonprofits and the like. And this passport idea was one of several that he raised as possibilities that might be introduced here. There are some challenges associated with that in terms of privacy rights and other impediments that are able to be overcome, as all things are, with the will and the determination. But obviously volunteerism is really important to a lot of nonprofit organizations. And not only for those nonprofits, but for those volunteers. Because it does point them in a socially conscious direction, and it helps them in terms of future career aspirations and otherwise. No working group has come out of that presentation. And I think that's the only presentation during the course of the year where a working group did not emerge because we had no commissioner that said, hey, I'll take that on. So that's still open and available. So if any of the commissioners would be interested in taking that on, let me know. And I think that too is an interesting area where you could work collaboratively with a lot of the nonprofits in the community that I think would benefit from a way of kind of ensuring that volunteers are doing the right things for the right reasons. That helps the quality of their service, but it also helps the nonprofit vet them and ensure that they have people who are going to add value in a meaningful way without while mitigating risk associated with bringing in people without appropriate evaluation. So that takes us through the year, and it was quite an exciting year. And by the way, I was a little concerned about how today's meeting would unfold because there was no speakers. First meeting we've had with no speaker this year. And it was dependent upon all of you stepping up and saying all the smart things that you've said. And so I'm deeply grateful to each of you, because I think this may go down in 2022 history. I'm only a century out. 2022 terms as maybe the most productive session we've had. And I think it sets the standard for future meetings in 2023. So I think that concludes that piece of my presentation, and I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Seems
I
like
think,
there's a few
Commissioner-
comments. So Commissioner Cooley.
I wonder if that's something we could actually do quarterly as a model.
I think that's, I don't know the interval, but the Chair and I will take that under advisement. I think certainly the idea of periodically kind of regrouping as a committee of the whole and seeing where we're at and who needs what help and who's advancing where, and candidly see what isn't working so well, or maybe the working group was responded to impulsively, and maybe there's no there. And that can happen too, although that's not a comment on the subject matter or the witnesses, all of whom I think have been excellent and added enormous value. But we're going to encounter some bandwidth issues. One of the ways in which we're addressing those bandwidth issues, you will find in 2023, you will have other colleagues joining you in this commission. So we will have additional hands and hearts and minds to contribute to our shared effort. So I just would like to thank each of you for all you've done this year and for all you'll do next year and beyond. And back to you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark, for putting today's working meeting. He's just been amazing. So I just want to thank you personally, not only for today, but also for arranging all of the speakers. And I think it speaks volumes to your intentionality of getting things done in the commission. So I just want to thank you very much. So yes, we are planning to figure out maybe a schedule. I know that just for some of the commissioners that came in after we handed them out, the new dates for the 2023 meetings were passed around. So we are going to try to see if we can come back. We'll definitely discuss on how often to come back into the boardroom. These are the most productive meetings usually, I'm sure. Commissioners that were here prior to the pandemic can attest to that. They become very robust conversations and a lot gets done. I think it's there's a beauty in seeing each other and being able to have a conversation without having to deal with technical difficulties. So we'll definitely revisit that. We want to utilize the space as much as possible. I was sharing with Vice Chair Lane that this space, this boardroom, maybe I don't want to say demolished, but it's going to be revamped. It's so it's a beautiful. I love our chambers, our board here. It's quite I think beautiful. So we're gonna miss it. So we want to utilize it as much as possible before we won't see it anymore. And that is just to give you updates. It's just based on it is a little outdated. Not a lot of people fit in the room. And also there's been just some want to make sure that it's fully ADA compliant. So expanding the boardroom, it's going to be something wonderful, and hope that we're able to welcome you all in a few years and see a new renovated floor across the hall on the other side. And of course, you will all be welcomed to join us. With that said, I don't have anything else on my end. I don't know if there's any announcements.
I do have one other announcement. And that is that you should thank the commissioners for your hard work. And everybody here has lots of stuff to do and lots of balancing of priorities in our lives, personal, business, professional, and otherwise. So by making this a priority, you're pursuing the common good with people who care. And thank you for doing that. And I also want to be sure to add my specific appreciation to the chair for her extraordinary leadership. Without her, none of this would have happened. So thank you very much, Commissioner Nye.
Here, here.
Any other announcements or business before we adjourn?
I'd like to request the information for the industrial policy working group. For tonight. I don't know if I could make that Zoom call, but I'm definitely interested in that.
Okay, I will see that you get it though.
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know at what point we discussed this, but there had been previous discussion about a budget for the commission to support meetings and lunch, snacks. Sustenance is-
Vacations.
So there is coffee and pastries that we do have available, and if we do more in person, I am making my budget available for my office to help cover that. We have also been utilizing, because of that, we've been able to utilize the funding for Thalia, which I definitely want to acknowledge her. She's been
Yes.
helping us with, she's been sending out emails, making sure that everybody has the minutes, putting the minutes together, etc. So that also has come out of our budget. So we're hoping to continue to do that. I think the fact that the commission is so active and that a lot of great policy has come out of the commission down the line can definitely help us even with bigger funding opportunities if there are any. But in the meantime, I am committing my own office personal budget to make sure that we have a staffer that's helping. We have any updates on technology, etc., so that we're able to fully operate and live stream and make it available. And so I'm committed to making sure that we continue to do that. So
Very
yeah.
much appreciated.
So it's a yes, but we're hoping to expand. If there are any additional needs, feel free to reach out to my office and we'll try to accommodate.
Pastries are in kinds budget.
Yes, exactly.
In terms of also getting support for the working groups, in terms of just kind of research capacities and partnering with other higher ed, grad students or other folks who could help. We could lean into some of that, or also just even some of the logistics of organizing sessions and a centralized place where all of our minutes are being held from all that. I don't know if there's how we could do that so we can cross scan the other committees' work as well. If there's any central repository that we could begin to.
We could definitely build that. Right now we don't have one because they're not official committees, they're ad hoc. Given OMA, we came to, obviously, we would have to open up, if they're official committees, we'd have to open them up, and we had some challenges. We were advised that it was probably best to do ad hoc at the moment. But we could absolutely centralize information and notes from different ones. We just have to make sure that we're circling back with the different ad hoc committees and conversations that make sure that they are centralized. And we could definitely support on that end. In regards to university help for research, I think that that's a great idea. I don't think we fully have explored that. At least I know within my office. The only thing that we had heard back from one of universities, we had put out an ad and nobody had gotten back to us, but they did advise if they do, typically it's about a year commitment. So we would have to be okay with a year may seem like a lot, but as you can tell, this year kind of flew by. So if we were to have someone committed to helping us out in 1 year, you know, what does that transition look like? And I think that that's work that we have to kind of work and figure out and create a succession plan for any of the universities or any students that would be available to help us with research. So I think that's completely doable, especially if we have a goal of fully doing research and creating policy within a year span. And we can definitely revisit that and reach out to the other research universities to kind of help us out with that. And I don't know if Mark has any additional comments on that.
Well, no, I mean, this would have an education application in the area, so I think that's something we can perhaps formalize. But I did want to make one other observation, and that is, I suggested as to the violence and recidivism and crime and social and criminal justice working group, I suggested if you could let me know of any speakers you would like us to invite to testify before the commission at large. That same offer goes to all commissioners. If there are other people you would like to see speak, either as tied to your specific working group or more generally, where topics we've not yet explored should be explored, and there's somebody you would recommend as an expert in a given field, let me know, and we'll start filling out the calendar for next year, because I want to rely upon the interest, expertise, and insights of the commission as we develop who to invite and what areas we seek to tackle. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that that offer was not limited to that specific working group, but is extended to all of you. And thank you for that.
Any other questions before we close out? Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn?
I'm gonna talk and move that we adjourn, but the best wishes for health and happiness to
All
everyone.
right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All those
Aye.
opposed, the ayes have it. We are adjourned.
And happy holidays, everybody. Stay well, be healthy, stay safe.
Thank you, Howard and Kathleen, for joining us virtually.
Thank you all.
Of course, thank you.
Happy
Bye.
holidays.
Happy